The smell of garlic bread and fresh basil filled the air as David pulled his car into the parking lot of Bella Vista Restaurant. It was one of those upscale places with white tablecloths and soft lighting that made everything look warm and inviting. Through the large windows, he could see families enjoying their Friday night dinners, the gentle buzz of conversation mixing with the clinking of silverware. "Are we really going to the fancy restaurant, Dad?" 8-year-old Lily asked from the back seat, her voice filled with excitement. She had been talking about this dinner all week, ever since her parents promised to celebrate her perfect report card somewhere special. "That's right, sweetheart," David said, adjusting his rearview mirror to look at his daughter. "You earned it with all those A's." His wife Jessica turned around from the passenger seat, smiling at their 2 children. "And Tommy gets to come too because he's been such a good big brother." 10-year-old Tommy tried to act cool, but David could see the excitement in his eyes. The boy had helped his sister with her math homework every night for months, never complaining when she needed extra help with the multiplication tables that came so easily to him. As they walked toward the restaurant entrance, David straightened his tie. He had chosen his best shirt and slacks for tonight, wanting to look nice for this special occasion. Jessica wore her favorite dress, the blue one that brought out her eyes, and the kids were dressed in their Sunday best. They looked like any other family heading out for a celebration dinner. The hostess greeted them with a warm smile as they entered. "Welcome to Bella Vista. How many in your party tonight?" "4, please," David replied. "We don't have a reservation, but we're hoping you might have a table available. Let me check for you." The hostess scanned her computer screen. "You're in luck. I have a beautiful table by the window. Right this way." As they followed her through the restaurant, David noticed the other diners. There was an elderly couple sharing dessert in the corner, a group of friends laughing over pasta dishes, and several families like theirs enjoying their evening out. The atmosphere was exactly what he had hoped for, relaxed but elegant, the kind of place where his children could experience fine dining while still feeling comfortable. "This is so pretty," Lily whispered as they were seated at their table. The white tablecloth was spotless, and fresh flowers sat in a small vase in the center. Through the window, they could see the restaurant's garden area, where tiny lights twinkled in the trees. Tommy picked up his cloth napkin and examined it carefully. "It's so much fancier than the paper ones at home." Jessica laughed softly. "Remember your table manners, you two. Put your napkins on your laps." David watched his family settle in, feeling a sense of pride and contentment. These were the moments he worked so hard for, simple family celebrations that would become lasting memories. He thought about all the overtime hours he had put in at his job as an engineer, the projects he had completed ahead of schedule, and the promotion he had received last month. All of it was worth it for nights like this. "Can we get breadsticks?" Tommy asked, eyeing the basket of warm bread that had just been delivered to the table next to them. "We'll see what they have," David said. "But first, let's look at the menu and decide what we want for our main course." The menus were leather-bound and heavy, filled with delicious-sounding options. David helped Lily sound out some of the longer words while Jessica explained different pasta shapes to Tommy. It was clear that everything was made fresh. "From the hand-rolled gnocchi to the wood-fired pizzas, I want spaghetti," Lily announced after careful consideration. "But the fancy kind with the tiny meatballs." "I think you mean the spaghetti with polpette," Jessica said, reading from the menu. "That sounds perfect." Tommy was torn between the chicken parmesan and the pepperoni pizza. "What do you think, Dad?" "Both look great," David said. "Maybe we could order the pizza to share as an appetizer, and then you could try the chicken?" The boy's face lit up. "Really? We can get both?" "It's a special night," David reminded him. "We're celebrating Lily's report card, and I want everyone to get exactly what they want." Around them, the restaurant hummed with quiet conversation and contentment. David could hear a mother at the next table telling her teenage son about her day at work, while across the room, a couple was planning their upcoming anniversary trip. It was the kind of place where people came to create good memories, to mark important occasions, to simply enjoy each other's company over a good meal. "I'm so proud of you, Lily," Jessica said, reaching over to squeeze her daughter's hand. "All that hard work on your homework really paid off." Lily beamed. "Mrs. Johnson said I improved the most in the whole class. She even wrote it on my report card. And I'm proud of Tommy too," David added, "for being such a helpful big brother. You've been a great teacher." Tommy sat up a little straighter. It wasn't that hard. Lily's really smart. She just needed someone to explain it differently. As they waited for their server to come take their order, David looked around the restaurant once more. The other families seemed so comfortable, so at ease in this setting. He wanted his children to feel that same sense of belonging, to understand that places like this were for everyone who wanted to celebrate life's good moments. "Are you excited about starting 4th grade next month?" Jessica asked Lily. "A little nervous," Lily admitted, "but mostly excited. I heard the 4th grade teacher lets you do science experiments." "That sounds amazing," David said. "Maybe we'll have to celebrate your first science project too." The warm bread arrived at their table, along with small plates of olive oil for dipping. The smell was incredible, and David could see both kids trying to contain their excitement. This was exactly the kind of experience he had hoped to give them. A chance to try new things, to be treated special, to feel like the wonderful children he knew them to be. "Can I try dipping my bread in the olive oil?" Tommy asked politely. "Of course," Jessica said. "Just remember to take small bites." As his family settled into the evening, David felt grateful for this moment of simple happiness. The restaurant was busy but not rushed, elegant but not stuffy, exactly the right place to celebrate his daughter's achievement and spend quality time together as a family. The family had been enjoying their bread and olive oil for about 10 minutes. When their server finally approached the table, David looked up with a friendly smile, ready to place their order. But something in the man's expression made him pause. The server's nameplate read Brad, and while he appeared to be in his early 30s, there was a hardness around his eyes that seemed out of place in such a welcoming restaurant. "Yeah, what do you want?" Brad said flatly, pulling out his order pad without making eye contact with anyone at the table. David blinked, surprised by the abrupt greeting. Every other server he could see in the restaurant was warm and professional, chatting pleasantly with their tables. He glanced at Jessica, who raised her eyebrows slightly but maintained her composure. "Hi there," David said, keeping his voice friendly. "We're ready to order. Could we start with, just tell me what you want to drink?" Brad interrupted, his pen tapping impatiently against his pad. Tommy and Lily exchanged confused glances. They weren't used to adults speaking so rudely, especially in a nice restaurant where everyone else seemed so polite. Lily scooted a little closer to her mother. "Okay," Jessica said carefully. "The children would like chocolate milk, and we'll have 2 iced teas. Please." Brad scribbled something on his pad without confirming the order. "Anything else?" "Well, we'd like to order our food too," David said, still trying to maintain a pleasant tone. "We've had time to look at the menu." "I'll get your drinks first," Brad said curtly, turning to walk away. "Excuse me," David called after him. "Could you tell us about the specials tonight?" Brad stopped and turned around slowly, his expression showing clear annoyance. "They're on the board over there," he said, gesturing vaguely toward the front of the restaurant. "You can read, right?" The comment hit David like a slap. Jessica's mouth fell open slightly, and he could see anger flashing in her eyes. The elderly couple at the table next to them had clearly overheard, and they were staring in disbelief. "I'm sorry," David said, his voice still controlled but with an edge to it now. "The specials. They're written down, over there." Brad spoke slowly as if explaining something to a child, his tone dripping with condescension. David felt his face grow warm. 20 years of dealing with difficult people in his engineering career had taught him how to stay calm under pressure. But this was different. This was happening in front of his children, who were watching the interaction with wide, confused eyes. "Dad, why is he being mean?" Lily whispered loud enough that Brad could hear. Brad's expression didn't change. If anything, he seemed almost amused by the family's discomfort. "I'll be back with your drinks," he said, walking away again. "What just happened?" Tommy asked, looking between his parents. Jessica reached over and took both children's hands. "Some people just have bad days, honey. It's not about us," but David knew it wasn't about a bad day. He had experienced this kind of treatment before, though never quite so blatantly, and certainly never in front of his family. He looked around the restaurant and noticed that Brad was approaching another table, a white family with 2 children about the same ages as Tommy and Lily. "Good evening, folks." Brad's voice was completely different now, warm and welcoming. "How are we doing tonight? Can I tell you about our amazing specials?" The contrast was so stark that David felt his stomach drop. The family at the other table laughed at something Brad said. and he could see the server making friendly conversation with the children, asking them about school and complimenting the little girl's dress. Daddy? Lily tugged on his sleeve. Are we going to leave? David looked down at his daughter's concerned face. She had been so excited about this dinner, had talked about it all week. The thought of packing up and leaving because of one person's bad behavior felt like letting that person win. But he also didn't want to subject his family to any more uncomfortable encounters. No, sweetheart, he said finally. We're going to stay and have our celebration dinner. When Brad returned with their drinks, his attitude hadn't improved. He practically slammed the glasses down on the table, causing some of the iced tea to slosh over the edge. Ready to order? He asked, not bothering to clean up the spilled tea. David decided to try one more time to have a normal interaction. Yes, we are. Could you tell us how the chicken parmesan is prepared? It's chicken with cheese and sauce, Brad said flatly. Pretty simple. Is it a large portion? We're wondering if our son could share. Look, do you want it or not? Brad interrupted. I've got other tables to take care of. Jessica had heard enough. Excuse me, she said, her voice firm but polite. Could we please speak to your manager? For the first time, Brad's expression showed a flicker of concern, but it quickly returned to indifference. She's busy. What's your order? David could see other diners starting to notice the tension at their table. A middle-aged woman at the bar kept glancing over, and the elderly couple next to them had stopped eating entirely, clearly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. We'll take the spaghetti with meatballs for our daughter, David said, deciding to push through and place their order. The chicken parmesan for our son, the salmon for my wife, and I'll have the ribeye steak. Medium rare. Brad scribbled the order without asking any follow-up questions about sides, preparation, or anything else that might constitute actual service. Anything else? Could we get some Parmesan cheese for the table? Jessica asked. If we have any, Brad replied with a shrug. And could you please wipe up the tea that spilled? David added. Brad looked at the small puddle on the table as if seeing it for the first time, then grabbed a napkin from the next table and gave the spill a half-hearted swipe, leaving the surface still sticky. As he walked away again, David noticed that Brad stopped at the table where he had been so friendly earlier. He was laughing with the family there, even crouching down to talk to their young son about his dinosaur toy. The difference in treatment was so obvious that other diners were beginning to take notice. I don't like him, Tommy said quietly. He's not being very nice, Jessica agreed, smoothing Lily's hair. But we're not going to let one person ruin our special night. David admired his wife's strength, but he could see the hurt in her eyes. This wasn't how any of them had imagined this evening going. He had worked hard to be able to bring his family to a place like this, and now they were being made to feel unwelcome by someone who seemed determined to make their experience unpleasant. Are we still going to get dessert? Lily asked hopefully. Absolutely, David said, making up his mind. We're going to have a wonderful dinner and celebrate your report card, just like we planned. But even as he said the words, he couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles with Brad were far from over. 25 minutes had passed since they placed their order, and David was starting to worry about the delay. He could see other families who had arrived after them already receiving their meals, while their table remained empty except for the bread basket and their drinks, which Brad had never refilled despite the glasses being empty for the past 10 minutes. I'm getting really hungry, Tommy said, glancing around at the plates of food being delivered to nearby tables. The aroma of garlic and herbs filled the air, making everyone's stomach growl. I know, buddy, David said, checking his watch. Our food should be coming soon. Jessica had been trying to keep the children entertained with quiet conversation about their upcoming vacation plans, but even she was starting to look frustrated. Maybe we should ask someone about our order, she suggested quietly. Before David could respond, he spotted Brad emerging from the kitchen carrying a large tray. Finally, their food was arriving. But as Brad approached their table, David noticed something was wrong with the server's expression. There was a strange smirk on his face, and he was walking more quickly than necessary. Here we go, Brad announced loudly, drawing attention from neighboring tables. He set the tray down on a nearby serving station and began picking up plates. The food looked delicious. Lily's spaghetti was perfectly presented with 3 large meatballs on top. Tommy's chicken parmesan was golden brown and covered in melted cheese, and the adult entrees looked restaurant quality. David felt a moment of relief. thinking maybe the worst of their service issues were behind them. "The spaghetti," Brad said, placing the plate in front of Lily with surprising gentleness. For a moment, David thought perhaps the server had realized his behavior had been inappropriate and was trying to make amends. "Chicken parmesan," Brad continued, setting Tommy's plate down carefully. Then he picked up Jessica's salmon dish. "And for the lady," he said, actually managing what looked like a genuine smile as he placed it in front of her. Finally, Brad reached for David's ribeye steak. It looked perfectly cooked, with a beautiful sear and accompanied by roasted vegetables and mashed potatoes. David was actually starting to feel hopeful that they could salvage this evening. "And your steak," Brad said, lifting the plate. But instead of setting it down gently like the others, Brad suddenly seemed to lose his balance. The plate tilted dramatically and the entire contents, the hot steak, the mashed potatoes, the vegetables, and what looked like several ounces of gravy, went sliding directly onto David's lap in the front of his shirt. "Oh no," David exclaimed, jumping up immediately as the hot food soaked through his clothes. The gravy was warm but not scalding, thankfully, but it was everywhere. On his shirt, his pants, even his shoes. "Oops," Brad said, but there was no concern in his voice. If anything, he sounded almost satisfied. "Guess I slipped." The entire restaurant seemed to freeze. Conversations stopped mid-sentence and dozens of eyes turned toward their table. David stood there, dripping with gravy and covered in food, while his family stared in shock. "Daddy!" Lily cried out, her hands flying to her mouth. Jessica immediately grabbed napkins from the table and rushed to help David, but there were simply too many stains to address quickly. "This is unacceptable," she said, looking directly at Brad. "You need to get your manager right now." But Brad made no move to help or to call for assistance. Instead, he stood there with that same smirk on his face, holding the empty plate as if admiring his handiwork. "These things happen," he said with a shrug. "Maybe you should have worn something more appropriate for eating." The comment was so outrageous that several nearby diners gasped audibly. The elderly woman at the next table actually put her hand over her heart, while her husband shook his head in disbelief. "What did you just say?" David asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Despite being covered in food, he maintained his composure, but Jessica could see the anger building in his eyes. "I said maybe you should dress better when you come to nice places like this," Brad repeated, louder this time so more people could hear. "Some people just don't know how to behave in restaurants." The words hung in the air like poison. David felt every eye in the restaurant on him, saw his children's confused and frightened faces, watched his wife's expression transform from shock to pure fury. This wasn't an accident, and it wasn't about his clothes or his behavior. This was something much uglier. "Are you serious right now?" Jessica demanded, standing up so quickly her chair nearly fell over. "You deliberately threw food on my husband." "Hey lady, accidents happen," Brad said, but his tone suggested he found the whole situation amusing. "Maybe your family should stick to places more suited to your situation." Tommy started to cry quietly, overwhelmed by the tension and his father's ruined appearance. Lily reached for her mother's hand, not understanding exactly what was happening but knowing it was very wrong. David looked down at his stained clothes, then at his family's distressed faces, then back at Brad's smug expression. In 20 years of professional life, he had never encountered such blatant disrespect, such obvious malicious intent. But this wasn't about him anymore. It was about his children watching this unfold, about the message this man was trying to send. "You did that on purpose," David said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent restaurant. "Prove it," Brad replied with a sneer. The challenge was clear, and David realized that this server was counting on his silence, on his unwillingness to make a scene, on his desire to protect his children from witnessing conflict. Brad had calculated that David would simply clean up, pay the bill, and leave quietly rather than fight back. But what Brad hadn't counted on was that other people in the restaurant had been watching too. The middle-aged woman at the bar had taken out her phone and was recording. The elderly couple was whispering urgently to each other. A businessman at a corner table was shaking his head in disgust. Most importantly, someone else had been watching from across the dining room. Someone who had the power to do something about what they had just witnessed. "This is absolutely disgusting behavior," Jessica said loudly, no longer caring who heard. "You should be ashamed of yourself." Brad opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say another word, an authoritative voice cut through the tension from behind him. What exactly is going on here? Everyone turned to see a woman in her 40s striding quickly toward their table, her face flushed with anger and determination. She wore the crisp uniform of restaurant management, and her expression made it clear that she had seen enough to understand exactly what kind of situation she was walking into. Brad's smug expression faltered for the first time all evening. The moment of reckoning he had never expected was about to begin. The restaurant manager, whose name tag read Maria Santos, had been conducting her usual evening walkthrough when she noticed the commotion at table 12. As the general manager of Bella Vista for the past 8 years, Maria prided herself on creating an atmosphere where every guest felt welcomed and valued. What she had just witnessed made her stomach turn with anger and embarrassment. "I asked what's going on here," Maria repeated, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had dealt with difficult situations before. She looked at Brad, who was still holding the empty plate, then at David standing there covered in food, and finally at the distressed family. "Just a little accident," Brad said, but his confident smirk was rapidly disappearing as he realized the gravity of his situation. The plate slipped. Maria's eyes narrowed. She had been watching from across the dining room for the past several minutes, and she had seen enough to know this was no accident. "The plate slipped," she repeated flatly. "Is that your explanation for deliberately dumping an entire dinner on this gentleman?" "I didn't deliberately do anything," Brad protested, but his voice lacked conviction now. "Really?" Maria turned to address the nearby diners. "Did anyone else see what happened here?" The elderly gentleman at the next table immediately spoke up. "That server threw the food right at him," he said, his voice shaking with indignation. "It was completely on purpose. We've been watching him treat this family terribly all evening." His wife nodded vigorously. "He's been rude and dismissive from the moment they sat down. This wasn't an accident, it was deliberate and cruel." The middle-aged woman from the bar approached the table, still holding her phone. "I recorded the whole thing," she said, showing Maria the screen. "I couldn't believe what I was seeing, so I started filming. You can see exactly what he did." Maria glanced at the video, and what she saw confirmed her worst fears. The footage clearly showed Brad deliberately tilting the plate and dumping its contents on David, then standing there with satisfaction while the family reacted in shock. "Sir," Maria said, turning to David with genuine concern and professionalism, "I am so incredibly sorry for what just happened. This behavior is absolutely unacceptable and does not represent the values of our restaurant in any way." David nodded, still processing everything that had occurred. He was covered in gravy and food. His family was traumatized, and he was standing in the middle of a crowded restaurant feeling humiliated and angry. "Ma'am," Jessica interjected, her voice strong despite her obvious upset, "your employee has been treating us poorly all evening. The food incident was just the final straw. He's been rude, dismissive, and frankly discriminatory from the moment he approached our table." Maria looked at Brad, whose face had gone pale as he realized the full implications of what was happening. "Is this true?" Before Brad could answer, Tommy spoke up in his small voice. "He was mean to us. He was nice to other people, but he was mean to our family." The innocence and honesty in the child's words seemed to cut through any remaining doubt. Maria's expression hardened as she turned back to Brad. "In 8 years of managing this restaurant," Maria said, her voice carrying clearly across the dining room, "I have never been more ashamed or disgusted by an employee's behavior. What you did tonight was not only unprofessional, it was discriminatory, it was cruel, and it was completely unacceptable." The entire restaurant was watching now. Conversations had stopped, and every diner was focused on what was happening at table 12. Some were recording on their phones, while others simply stared in shocked silence. "Look, it was just—" Brad started to say. "No," Maria cut him off sharply. "There is no excuse for what you did. None whatsoever. You deliberately humiliated a guest and his family, and you did it in front of children. That behavior has no place in this restaurant or any other establishment that claims to serve the public." She turned to David and his family. "On behalf of Bella Vista Restaurant, I offer my deepest and most sincere apologies. What happened tonight was wrong, and I take full responsibility for allowing someone like this to represent our business." Then Maria turned back to Brad, her voice growing even stronger. "You're fired. Effective immediately. Clean out your locker and leave the premises. Security will escort you out if necessary." The restaurant erupted in spontaneous applause. Diners at tables throughout the dining room began clapping, some even standing up to show their support for Maria's decisive action. The elderly couple clapped enthusiastically, while the woman with the phone nodded approvingly. Brad's face went from pale to red as the reality of his situation hit him. "You can't fire me over this," he said desperately. "It was just an accident." "I can and I am," Maria replied firmly. "And it wasn't an accident. We have witnesses, we have video evidence, and we have your own behavior as proof. You're done here." She motioned to two other employees who had approached during the confrontation. "Please escort this individual to collect his belongings and then ensure he leaves the property immediately." As Brad was led away, still protesting weakly, Maria turned her full attention back to the family. "I cannot begin to express how sorry I am about this entire situation. Your dinner tonight is completely on the house, and I personally want to ensure that the rest of your evening is everything you hoped it would be." "Thank you," David said, finally finding his voice again. Despite everything that had happened, he was impressed by Maria's immediate and decisive response. "Let me get you some towels and see about getting those stains addressed," Maria continued. "We have an excellent dry cleaner next door, and I'll personally cover any costs for cleaning or replacing your clothes." Jessica squeezed David's hand, feeling a mixture of relief and gratitude that someone in authority had finally stepped in to address the situation properly. "Are we still going to have dinner?" Lily asked hopefully, looking up at Maria. Maria smiled down at the little girl, her expression softening. "Absolutely, sweetheart. We're going to make sure you have the most wonderful celebration dinner ever. What were you celebrating tonight?" "My report card," Lily said proudly. "I got all A's, Maria exclaimed. "That definitely deserves a special celebration. How about we get you a fresh meal and maybe a special dessert to go with those perfect grades?" As the family began to settle back into their seats, with David cleaned up as much as possible and wearing a restaurant jacket Maria had provided, the atmosphere in the dining room began to return to normal. Other diners resumed their conversations, but many stopped by their table to offer words of support and to praise Maria's handling of the situation. The incident that had started as a nightmare was beginning to transform into something entirely different, a demonstration of how a community could come together to support what was right and reject what was wrong. Maria had personally taken over serving their table, and the difference was like night and day. She brought fresh, perfectly prepared meals for everyone, made sure the children had extra chocolate milk, and even arranged for the chef to prepare a special dessert presentation for Lily's achievement. What had started as the worst restaurant experience of their lives was quickly becoming one of the most memorable, for entirely different reasons. "How's your chicken parmesan, Tommy?" Maria asked, checking on the table for the third time in 20 minutes. "It's really good," Tommy replied, his earlier tears completely forgotten as he enjoyed his meal. "The cheese is all crispy on top." "And Lily, how are those meatballs?" Maria continued. "They're huge," Lily giggled, trying to cut one of the oversized meatballs with her fork. "I don't think I can eat them all." "Well, you just eat what you can," Maria said warmly. "We can always wrap up the leftovers for you to take home." David had changed into a clean shirt that Maria had somehow procured from a nearby men's store, and his confidence was gradually returning. I have to say, Maria, the way you handled that situation was incredible. You didn't have to do all this, and yes, I did," Maria replied firmly. "What happened tonight goes against everything this restaurant stands for. We've been serving this community for 15 years, and we believe that every single person who walks through our doors deserves to be treated with respect and dignity." Jessica smiled at her husband across the table. "The kids will certainly remember this dinner for a long time. But for good reasons now, I hope," Maria said. "Speaking of which, I believe someone mentioned perfect grades." Before anyone could answer, Maria signaled to someone across the restaurant. Moments later, 3 servers approached the table carrying a small cake decorated with sparkler candles. The entire dining room began singing "For She's a Jolly Good Fellow," as Lily's face lit up with pure joy. "Make a wish, sweetheart," David said, his eyes moist with emotion as he watched his daughter's happiness. Lily closed her eyes tight, made her wish, and blew out all the sparklers while the restaurant applauded again. This time the applause was full of genuine celebration, rather than the righteous anger from earlier. As the evening wound down, other diners continued to approach their table. The elderly couple from the next table stopped by to shake David's hand and tell him how proud they were of how he had handled himself during the difficult situation. "You showed real class tonight," the elderly man said. "Your children are lucky to have such a strong father." The middle-aged woman who had recorded the incident also came over. "I've already posted the video online," she said. "Not the part that would embarrass your family, but the part showing how the manager handled it. People need to see that there are still businesses willing to do the right thing." "You posted it online?" Jessica asked, not sure how she felt about that. "Just the part showing the restaurant's response," the woman assured her. Maria's actions deserve recognition. She didn't hesitate for even a second to do what was right. As they prepared to leave, Maria appeared one final time with a small gift bag. "This is just a little something for Lily," she said. "I'll reward for those excellent grades." Inside the bag was a small stuffed animal, a lion wearing a graduation cap, along with a gift certificate for a free family meal. "The lion is because you were brave tonight," Maria explained to Lily, "and the gift certificate is so you can come back and visit us again soon." "Can we really come back?" Tommy asked, looking between his parents. "Of course you can," David said, realizing that he actually wanted to return. "Maria has shown us what kind of place this really is." As they walked toward the parking lot, David reflected on how dramatically the evening had changed. What had started as a celebration dinner turned into a nightmare, and then transformed into something else entirely. A lesson in standing up for what's right and the power of community support. "Dad," Lily said as she buckled her seatbelt, "why was that man so mean to us?" David considered his answer carefully. "Some people haven't learned how to treat others with kindness, sweetheart. But what's important is that there were many more good people in that restaurant who stood up for what was right." "Like Maria?" Tommy asked. "Exactly like Maria," Jessica agreed. "She showed us that when good people see something wrong, they take action to fix it." Over the next few days, the story began to spread through their community and beyond. The woman's video of Maria's response had indeed gone viral, but in the best possible way. The footage showed Maria's decisive action, the community of diners supporting the family, and Bella Vista Restaurant's commitment to treating all customers with dignity and respect. Local news stations picked up the story, focusing on the restaurant's exemplary handling of the situation, rather than dwelling on the negative incident itself. Business at Bella Vista increased dramatically as people came specifically to support an establishment that had demonstrated such clear moral leadership. David received calls from friends and colleagues who had seen the coverage, all expressing their admiration for how he had maintained his dignity throughout the ordeal. Several coworkers mentioned that they wanted to bring their own families to Bella Vista, impressed by Maria's swift and appropriate response. The incident also sparked conversations in their community about respect, discrimination, and the importance of bystanders speaking up when they witness inappropriate behavior. Tommy and Lily's school even used the story as a teaching moment about treating others fairly and standing up for what's right. 2 weeks later, the family returned to Bella Vista as promised. This time, their experience was flawless from start to finish. Maria greeted them personally, and several staff members remembered the children and asked about school and activities. It was clear that the entire restaurant team had embraced the values that Maria had demonstrated that night. As they enjoyed their second celebration, dinner at the restaurant, this time for Tommy's excellent performance in a school science fair, David looked around at the warm, welcoming atmosphere and felt grateful for the lesson they had all learned. Sometimes the worst experiences can lead to the most meaningful outcomes, especially when good people choose to do the right thing. The story of that evening would become one that the family told for years to come, not as a tale of discrimination and cruelty, but as an example of how quickly things can change when people with integrity decide to take a stand. It was proof that while there will always be individuals who choose hatred and prejudice, there are many more who will stand up for justice, kindness, and doing what's right.